I want to share a funny video with you that really will highlight what it is we're going to talk about today. So, E, if you could get the lights for us, Danica is going to roll this video clip, and you'll laugh through it, and then we'll talk about it on the other side.
I got a big butt. It's gigantic, if I'm going to be blunt about it. And you know what? The funny thing is, I got several big butts. And before you discard me or wince at the disgusting notion of that, I'm going to go out on a limb here and suggest that possibly you have at least one big butt as well. Yeah, you like that? Hurts a little, huh? Let me tell you something. Let me just tell you something, okay? Everybody we know has a big butt. And more often than not, it's the thing that actually gets in the way of us living a consistent life for Jesus. I think you know what I'm talking about. I'm going to expound a little bit, okay? See if you can recognize some of these butts. But I have to work more. But my favorite TV show is on. But my kids have practice. But I got to tweet something. But it's such a beautiful day. But I'm just not in the mood. But I deserve a break today. You see, everything kind of interferes with my life of just living an authentic life for God, okay? And more often than not, it always has something to do with some sort of butt, okay? Even the littlest of butt can distract me. It really can. The littlest butt can make me think, well, I'm not going to pray today. I'm not going to think about it today. I'm not going to deny myself. I'm not going to read the Bible, blah, blah, blah. Whatever God asked me to do, I seem to have a butt for it and to get away, okay? And the most horrendously big butt of all time is the butt that gets in the way of me just hanging out with God and reading His Word. It's true. Think about it. All the times you're about to open that, and all of a sudden a big giant butt gets in the way. A butt, much like one of these. But I got a farm bill, but I'm tired, but the game's over, but I read last Tuesday, but I gotta check Facebook, but I don't like Leviticus, but it's too hot in here, but I just don't like books, but I don't understand it, but it's boring. But what does that have to do with me in the 21st century? Those are some ugly butts, people. Let's just call them what they are, ugly. Ugly butts. Okay? And there's a lot more to them, sad but true. Here's a list, although not exhaustive, of some of the most popular butts known to mankind. But I don't have enough money yet. But others will think that I'm a nerd if I carry the Bible. But they won't like me if I talk about Jesus. But I don't know if God will do what I ask. But I just can't get motivated. But I'm afraid. But I don't have all the answers. But the small group is the same night as Monday Night Football. But can't I just let my life speak for itself? But I'm not happy. But that's not my gift. But that's the pastor job. But I don't know how to pray. But I can't believe that. But I don't know where to start. But everybody else is having fun. Butts abound, friend. Butt. Here a butt, there a butt, everywhere a butt. Okay? And the most overused butt of all time, but I just don't have enough time. Really? Oh, come on. We have a lot of butts. God has given us a real simple word. Okay? If we learn it and we share it and we teach it and we live by it, then see, God gets glorified, people benefit, and then we get blessed. That's why we do what we do. That's the why behind the butt. Okay? And ultimately, that's the whole point I'm trying to make here, my fellow butt lovers, is if your butt is bigger than your why, then your butt's too big. Okay, it's time to, metaphorically speaking, snap into a Slim Jim. Okay, let's slap on some spiritual shape-ups and hit the road a little bit so we can just manage the butts a little bit. That's all we're trying to do. That's what we're talking about. Let's minimize the excuses. Let's shrink the butts. Shrink the butts. Say it with me. Shrink the butts. That's what we need to do. And you and I can do that together. We can conquer this. You and I can do it if we start today, okay? I know we can. Let's just do it. No ifs, ands, or... Yeah. I think you get it.
The reality is that we have a problem with our butts. And the reality is we need to shrink the butts. We need to eliminate the butts. And one of our biggest butts is yes, but. And the reality is, look, according to communication scientists, when we say yes, but, the but negates the yes. Let me give you an example. If I were to say LeBron James is a great basketball player, but he only has 4 championships. The fact that he's only won 4 championships negates or calls into question whether he's a great basketball player. Another example, if I said my university is a great school, but the tuition is too expensive. Can a school be great if the tuition is too expensive and you can't afford it? Again, that's the power of but. Instead, communication scientists want us to say yes and instead of yes but. So it would sound something like this. Yes, LeBron James is a great basketball player, and if he wins one more championship, he may be considered the GOAT. Yes, my university is a great school, and and it would be even greater if tuition costs were lower. Yes, and is better than yes, but. And so when we're having organizational conversations, then you're sitting around the conference table and we're discussing strategy and organizational priorities and the business of the organization, and somebody says yes, but. Whatever they said yes to, the but negates the yes. So it's yes and. Now, what's fascinating is that in this story, there is a very subtle and tacit yes, but that in the text. And today's passage, this yes, but leads to a rowdy and raucous riot in the synagogue that spills out into the streets of Nazareth. Why? Just because the people said, yes, but. So I want you to join me in Luke chapter 4. Today is part 2 of where we were last week. Remember, Jesus is in the synagogue. He's returned home from his temptation. He is in the power of the Spirit, and he is reading from the scroll of Isaiah 61 that says, the Spirit of the Lord is upon me and has anointed me to proclaim and to preach good news to the poor, to proclaim, to set the captives free, to proclaim freedom for the oppressed, to give sight to the blind, to proclaim the acceptable year of the Lord's favor, the year of Jubilee to the people, not of the 50-year Jubilee, but the salvation of our God. Jesus finishes reading Isaiah 61 verses 1 and 2, and then he rolls up the scroll, gives it to the attendant, sits down, and gives his 7-word sermon, 9 in the English, 7 in the Greek. And Jesus says, today in your hearing, this scripture has been fulfilled. Mic drop moment. Remember from last week? And remember, you guys have been nudging me saying, hey, Pastor, you need to get you one of them 7-word sermons. You preached for 45 minutes. Jesus had 7 words and preached a great message with 7 words. And I told y'all, I'm not preaching any 7-word sermons around here. Last week, the theme was the hometown hero accepted at home. This week, the theme flips. The hometown hero is rejected at home. So let's go back into the synagogue. Jesus has given the mic drop moment, and what we're going to see in verses 22 through 24 is the people's cynicism of Jesus' messianic claim. There are 3 C's as you trek with me. I always try to give you an alliteration so you guys can follow me. We're going to talk about cynicism. We're going to talk about Jesus' kingdom counter to their cynicism, and then we'll look at the people's contempt in verses 28 through 30. So 22 through 24 is the people's cynicism. Jesus, his kingdom counters in verses 25 through 27, and then verses 28 through 30, we see the people's contempt. But let's start with their cynicism of Jesus' messianic claims. Watch this, just verse 22. The text says that after Jesus' mic drop moment, after Jesus has shocked the people, their jaws are on the floor as Jesus preached his first sermon, 7 words, mic drop moment. Verse 22 says, they were all testifying and speaking well of him, and they were amazed by his gracious words that came from his mouth. But yes, Jesus is a great communicator. Yes, the 7-word sermon blessed our socks off because he read from the prophet Isaiah and his words were gracious. Jesus is saying that what Isaiah prophesied in Isaiah 61 and 1 and 2, that age, that messianic, that salvific age that Isaiah talked about is happening right now in our day. We couldn't be more blessed. This is the greatest news we've ever heard, but see, yet in the text, yet is basically but. Yes, this was great, but they said, man, isn't this Joseph's kid? The but in the same breath, their cynicism overrides what their ears have heard. The people say, yes, he's a great teacher. Yes, he's spoken great words from the prophet Isaiah, but he can't be Messiah because he's Joseph's son. Look at the next slide. I've given you the parallel passage for this passage is in Mark chapter 6, verses 1 through 6. And Luke says, they said, man, but this is Joseph's son. In Mark 6:3, look at the verse. It says, when they heard Jesus' teaching, they said, isn't this the carpenter, the son of Mary, the brother of James and Joses and Judah and Simeon and Simon or Simeon? Aren't his sisters here with us? So they were offended by him. They said, man, he can't be the Messiah. We know his father, we know his mother, we know his 4 brothers and his sisters. After all, we watched him take his first steps. We cheered when he spoke his first words. He played with our kids. He attended sleepovers, slumber parties at our house. We were present at his bar mitzvah. He can't be the Messiah. Didn't he ride his bike? Remember when they took the training wheels off his bike? We saw him fall and skin his knee up. He can't be God's Messiah. For people who struggle to accept Jesus' extraordinary claims, oftentimes their conflict is rooted in their preconceived notions that he is not who he claims to be, and therefore the veracity of what Jesus says about himself never receives a fair hearing. Yes, but. Yes, he's a good speaker, but he can't be the Messiah. Look at what the further cynicism, and when I talk about cynicism, what I was disappointed about is, you guys know I'm reading like 7 or 8 commentaries as I prepare for Luke every week. And multiple commentators said that the people are skeptical of Jesus' claims. I disagree with that. Because I think oftentimes we use skepticism and cynicism interchangeably, and they are 2 very different things. That's why I disagree with the scholars. I don't think the people are skeptical here. I think they're being cynical here. What's the difference? When someone is skeptical, they are unsure about what's being said, but they're open to be persuaded. They're open for more information. They're open to be convinced otherwise. There's just not enough information. But hey, if you have convincing information, I'm willing to change my perspective. That's a skeptic. Somebody who's a cynic or who is cynical, they've already made up their mind. It's a no, or it's usually a no on whatever is going on. And so you can give them all the information you want to give them, and they've really kind of already made up their mind, and they have a negative perspective on whatever is being proposed. Skeptics are open, cynics are closed. These people aren't open. They didn't say, hey, Jesus, share more information with us, or hey, give us another sermon. They're like, he can't be Messiah. They didn't say, can he be? They said he can be. So I disagree with the scholars on that. These people are cynical. They're not skeptical. And so their cynicism is what we're looking at now. Verse 23, Jesus wants to foreshadow that it's not just this moment, but it's a future. It's a more comprehensive than this. Verse 23, Jesus said to them, "No doubt you will quote this proverb to me, 'Doctor, heal yourself.' What we've heard that took place in Capernaum, do here in your hometown also. Doctor, heal yourself. Physician, heal your own limp. A doctor who cures other people is himself ill." The people are jealous of Jesus' mighty works that he had performed in neighboring Capernaum. So Jesus in Luke says that this is what you will say to me. Mark chapter 6 and Luke chapter 4 are parallel passages. We think that Luke has taken this story in Mark 6 and has brought it forward earlier chronologically than it actually happened. So if this is early in Luke's gospel, but chronologically it happened later, then that's why the people would say to Jesus, "Hey, we've heard your words. Now show us the miracles. Show us the wonders. Show us your extraordinary, supernatural, divine works. You know, we heard the works that you did in Capernaum. And you brought heaven and earth together. Why don't you do that here?" And so they are challenging Jesus. We don't believe your words unless we see your works. You guys get that? The people are saying, we've heard your mighty words from Isaiah 61. Now, where are the mighty works? And then we'll believe that you are the Messiah. I love this because one author said this. John Nolan says, "Only the mighty deeds before their very eyes will dispel their impression that only Joseph's son is here." That's all they see. It's Mary and Joseph's kid. And unless Jesus performs the supernatural works, they won't believe that he is God's Messiah, that he is the Christ, that he is the anointed one that he claims to be without the mighty works. Folks, Jesus can't perform the mighty works because they haven't first believed his mighty words. Guys, I'm talking now. And so there's a disconnect. They've heard the mighty words. They're asking for the mighty works. They can't get the mighty works because they didn't first believe the mighty words. And so they say, "Hey, Jesus, you were raised in Nazareth. This is your hometown. You got to show us the signs and wonders and miracles. You one of us. You're a Nazarene like us." I loved it because yesterday my sister was having an event in Santa Monica to celebrate my mother's would-be 70th birthday on tomorrow, and my Aunt Claire is here from Dallas, Texas to celebrate, and we turned up yesterday like we've been doing on that street for 56 years because we all from Santa Monica, and we born and raised and bred, and you can take us out of Santa Monica, but you can't take Santa Monica out of us. And the same way I felt yesterday going back to my childhood street is the same way Jesus is coming home. They said, "Jesus, if you're really a Nazarene like the rest of us, you got to share these works. Why would you do it for Venice, but you won't do it in Santa Monica?" See, Capernaum was just next door. Now, you ain't really one of us if you don't do the miracles in Santa Monica that you did over in Venice or Culver City or West LA. Come on now. You from Santa Monica, aren't you? That's what's going on in the text. Now, verse 24, Jesus drops this bomb on them. He also said to them, "Truly I tell you, no prophet is accepted in his hometown." Why? Because familiarity breeds contempt, doesn't it? Look at this quote from Thabiti Anyabwile. I gave you this in your slides, in your Coram Deo slides. I wanted you to have this. This was so good. Thabiti says this. He says, sometimes the familiar hides the fantastic. I love that line. Familiarity is why a lot of people don't recognize Jesus as their Messiah. They've had just enough Bible to make them think they know. So they're not looking any deeper. They're familiar with Sunday school Bible stories. They come to church at Easter and Christmas. They've heard a little bit on TV or in the barbershop. So they've become familiar and they don't see. Then Thabiti, as a pastor, says, don't be too familiar with Jesus. Look hard and listen long. Be certain you recognize him for who he is. He is someone who gets deeper the deeper you look. That's so good. The more familiar we are with something or someone, the more critical and the more bored and the more likely we are to lose respect for that person or that thing. So Jesus says, no prophet is accepted, is welcomed, is favored in his hometown. In your Bibles, this section says Jesus rejected in Nazareth. But what I love about this, James Edwards says, but the reality of the text says Jesus was rejected in Nazareth, but Jesus also rejected Nazareth. They rejected him and he rejected them. One scholar said, after the people reject Jesus in Luke 4, Jesus never goes back home. I can't imagine not going back to Santa Monica. And I've been treated bad in Santa Monica. But it's home. We used to walk to the beach and boogie board and fish off the pier when we were kids. That's home to me. Jesus was treated so bad in this text, he never went back home. He made Capernaum his home because they treated him well in Capernaum. Jesus had to go next door because the Nazarenes tried to kill him. This is where we're going in the text. So you see the people's cynicism about Jesus' messianic claims. They say he can't be who he said he is because he says he's Messiah, but we haven't seen any messianic works. So unless we see the works, we won't believe the word. Now Jesus understands their cynicism, and look at his kingdom counter to Israel's rejection in verses 25 through 27. And this gets him in a world of trouble. And Jesus loved getting into what the Congressman John Lewis called good trouble. Jesus was a master of getting into good trouble. Look at verses 25, 26, and 27. Jesus says, but I say to you, there were certainly many widows in Israel in Elijah's days when the sky was shut up for 3 years and 6 months while a great famine came over all the land. Yet Elijah was not sent to any of them except at Zarephath in Sidon. And in the prophet Elisha's time, there were many in Israel who had leprosy, and yet not one of them was cleansed except Naaman the Syrian. Here, for Jews self-selecting out of the messianic age through disbelief, God will include the Gentiles as he did on 2 occasions in the Hebrew Bible. Elijah was sent to a Gentile widow of Zarephath in Sidon in 1 Kings chapter 17 verses 8 through 24. And Jesus reminds the Jewish people in the synagogue, hey, when our nation was at its worst in the time of the kings, when there was, in Israel's history, there was national idolatry and rebellion and wickedness. the glory, the goodwill, and the grace of God was shown to Israel's Gentile neighbors who were hostile antagonists to God's people, and yet in Israel's disbelief, in their apostasy, in their sort of national rebellion, God pivoted to Gentiles, and the widow at Zarephath in Elijah's day is one example. Then Jesus gives a second proof. And then when Elijah handed over the prophetic ministry and mantle to Elisha, Elisha was there as God cleansed Naaman the Syrian of his leprosy. In 2 Kings chapter 5, verses 1 through 19, Jesus is saying to the people, you guys be careful. Now, this was a really good insight from Walter Liefeld. He says, observe that Jesus does not state here that the prophet Elijah in verse 26 and Elisha in verse 27 went to Gentiles because they were rejected by Jews. Rather, they went because they were sent by God. James Edwards says this. He says, the widow at Zarephath and Naaman the Syrian illustrate the Isaiah text that Jesus just read in the synagogue. They are the widow of Zarephath and Naaman the leper are the poor who received the good news. The captives released, the blind whose sight is restored, the beneficiaries of the year of the Lord's favor. Jesus gives two examples who were the recipients of God's grace and favor, and they weren't Jews. The implication is this: if and when Israel rejects their Messiah, as they're doing real time as Jesus is sitting in their synagogue, God's kingdom counter will pivot to include the Gentile nations into God's kingdom program, not merely as recipients of God's grace, but equally important as the carriers of it. Don't miss that. What I didn't find in any of my commentary reading, which I was disappointed about, is most of the commentary authors focus on the fact that God would include the Jewish people as a result of Israel's rejection. I don't think that's the most significant part. God always intended for Jews and Gentiles to be a part of the kingdom. The Jews were supposed to be a conduit of blessing to the nations, right? That's what God told Abraham in Genesis chapter 12. God tells the patriarch, through you all the nations will be blessed. From the very beginning of the patriarchal history, God intended for every nation, tribe, language, and people group to be included in God's kingdom. What is new here is that because the Jewish people forfeited their belief in their Messiah, because they self-selected out of the Messianic age, God would not only bring the good news to the Gentiles, which he always intended, but he would make the Gentiles the carriers of the good news. Do you know the people that carry the good news to majority of the world? It's not Jewish people, it's Gentiles. That's been historically true for 2,000 years. It wasn't true in the first century, but every century after that it's been true. It's not that Gentiles would get saved, but that God would use them as his ambassadors of reconciliation. That, my friends, is the good news. So I love this reality that Jesus' plan for Gentile inclusion into the kingdom program of salvation is not an afterthought. It wasn't concocted in the book of Acts. Jesus is referencing the Gentile mission at the outset of his earthly ministry, and it was mentioned 2,000 years before Jesus to Abraham in Genesis chapter 12. It's always been God's plan. From the foundation of the world, it was God's plan. Now, last three verses, and we'll get you out of here because Claire's got some wonderful Korean food for us to eat, and I know you guys' stomachs are rumbling, and so you want me to hurry up and get to the end of this because we got Martinelli's and everything else chilling in the fridge as we turn up for Claire. So let's speed through the end of this. I got to edit that out later. Verses 28 through 30, the people's murderous contempt for Jesus' assertion of Gentile inclusion is what these last three verses are about. Now, they've heard Jesus' two proofs about the widow of Zarephath and Naaman the leper. Now remember, these people that God had healed, their nations were a thorn in Israel's side. And Jesus says, hey, remember, God blessed your Gentile neighbors, not just your Gentile neighbors, but your Gentile neighbors who had their hands around your ancestors' throat while God healed them. Not after, not before, but while God was blessing the widow at Zarephath and while he was cleansing Naaman, they had their hands geopolitically around Israel's neck. And God healed them and cleansed them and blessed them anyway. Now, how do you think that goes over with the people? Look at verse 28. Luke tells us, when they heard this, everyone in the synagogue was enraged. There isn't a single person in the synagogue who's not filled with rage, indignation, anger, and fury. Can you imagine the entire synagogue against one person? These are fighting words. If they were in the hood, they'd be boxing out in the street. Because the Jewish people in the synagogue are saying, no. It seems like he is for our enemies and not for us. This doesn't correspond with the message of goodwill and good news that he just gave us from Isaiah 61. It seems like he's exalting our antagonistic neighbors from our past and saying that what God did in the past, he'll do again. Oh no, we fighting. Y'all move the furniture. They're not just angry, but look at what happens in verse 29. It turns to attempted murder. Verse 29 says, they got up, they drove Jesus out of town, brought him to the edge of a hill that their town was built on, intending to hurl him over the cliff. So their fury, their anger, their indignation, their rage has driven them to become a lynch mob. Now, it's possible that the people think this is justified because in Deuteronomy chapter 13, verses 1 through 5, Moses instructed the people that when they went into the land, if they encountered a prophet who called them to walk away from God and to serve the other gods, then they were to take that prophet and that they were to stone him to death. Some scholars think that the people, by their attempted murder and homicide of Jesus, they're actually fulfilling Deuteronomy 13 because they think Jesus is a false prophet. Keep in mind, and I'll remind us of this as we trek through Luke's gospel again, Jesus is not the only Jewish male making messianic claims in the first century. Jesus isn't the only male performing miracles. Jesus isn't the only man claiming to be Messiah who's doing miraculous things and drawing crowds to his public speeches. Jesus is not the only one, and so the people are to give them the benefit of the doubt. Jesus doesn't, but for us as humans, maybe they're just unsure. Maybe there are other claimants and messianic claimants on the scene. And how do they know whether Jesus is truly who he says? Because the other guy said he was Messiah, and then the guy before him said he was Messiah. You guys know how it is. Kind of like when you hear some prophets say, the world's coming to an end in 2025. And then 2025 comes and goes in the world. You know, when we hear those prophecies, guess what we do when we hear those? We roll our eyes. Like, here's another one. That's what they were doing in the first century. They were fatigued with all of the messianic claimants and the guys who were claiming to be somebody who was going to liberate Israel from Roman oppression and tyranny. They were exhausted. Jesus is just another guy claiming to be Messiah. And we may grant them a pass. Jesus does not, because he knows their hearts. Look at verse 30. Jesus escapes this difficult situation. It says in verse 30, but Jesus passed right through the crowd and went on his way. You know, it's unclear whether whether his escape was by miraculous means, or perhaps there was so much anarchy and chaos and pandemonium among the lynch mob that Jesus just slipped through their fingers. Let me give you this quote. I thought this was a great way to wrap up this scene where Jesus is welcomed and accepted in his hometown, and then in the very next moment rejected in his hometown, all in the same church meeting. Well, I done seen church folks act the ugly. I seen gangsters and thugs and pimps and lowlifes and social pariah act better than church folks. And they're doing this in the synagogue. But I love that James Edwards has a sobering comment, and I gave this to you. It's lengthy, but I thought it was a great way to sum up what we just read. James Edwards says, we shouldn't be surprised if Jesus was... He says, we should not be surprised if Jesus was rejected by outsiders and enemies. The unsettling truth of this story is that the greatest danger to the way of God in this world is posed by those who are closest to it. Jesus is rejected not in Sodom and Gomorrah, but in Nazareth. He's betrayed not by the devil, but by one of the 12 whom he chose. He's crucified not in pagan Rome, but in the heart of Israel at Jerusalem. The rejection of Jesus repeats the rejection of God in the history of Israel, whose ultimate adversary was not Baal worship or foreign nations, but God says, my own people who are bent on turning from me in Hosea 11:7. I thought James Edwards' comments were amazing. It's like, guys, this should be shocking for us. Jesus, John chapter 1 says, came to his own, but his own did not receive him. He came to his own countrymen, to his own tribe, to his own people, and they did not receive him. That should be shocking to us. Not so if it was pagan, if it was the Romans. Shouldn't be surprised by that. These are Jewish people in his hometown in a local synagogue, and they're trying to murder the King of Glory. Here are my coram deos, and these were so compelling for me, and I'd love to hear what you guys will say on Wednesday during life group. But here's the first one. Jesus, Jesus is the Messiah, the Christ, the anointed one of God. He claimed that on last week, and there are no ifs, ands, or buts about it. See, their yes, but led to a murderous riot. May we just say yes and no yes but. Jesus is the Jewish Messiah. He is the Christ. He is the anointed one of God in whom the power of God rests. And we don't add any addendums to that. There's no ifs, ands, or buts about it. Number two, if we don't believe the mighty words of Jesus, then we'll never see the mighty works of Jesus. See, folks, God is the same yesterday, today, and forever, and Jesus still does miracles today. He still does, but we've got to believe Him with our whole hearts. Without faith, it's impossible to please God. And we want the mighty works of God, but we really don't believe the words of God. We really don't believe that God is able. We've got a song that we're going to do next week called More Than Able. God is, see, we lie when we say God is able. That's a lie. God is more than able. God still does miracles today. And so if we just believe, then I believe God can still show up and do the impossible. Do the unthinkable, do the unprecedented, can still do remarkable and fabulous and extraordinary and phenomenal things even in our day, because God can't change. Oh, but we got to believe the mighty words so that we can see His mighty works. Then the last one, Gentile inclusion into God's kingdom program has been His heart from the very beginning, and it is by no means an apostolic afterthought. God's desired this before He created the heavens and the earth. And so it ought to be our agenda to pursue the inclusion of all God's people into God's kingdom program. And that's what we want to be at Reconcile Church Los Angeles. We want to see every nation, tribe, language, and people group gathered around the throne, which is why our big vision is Vision 195. We want to plant a Reconcile Church that plants other churches in every country that makes up the United Nations, and there are 195 of them. I think 2 just dropped out, so the number is 193. That's our big vision, because we believe that everybody is going to be gathered around the throne, because Revelation chapter 5 and chapter 7 tells us that that's exactly what John saw when he got a glimpse into the throne room of God. So, Father, here we are. We thank you for this word. Jesus, we're sad that you were rejected at home. It hurts our hearts that you couldn't go back home, that they didn't believe your word, and that they tried to kill you in your own backyard, in the place where you rode your bike and where you played with the kids in the street, and where you learned your carpentry craft from your father Joseph, how your heart was tied to Nazareth, but Nazareth's heart wasn't tied to you. Jesus, you were rejected from the very beginning, though some embraced you. So God, would you help us to realize that we're going to be rejected too. If we decide to live for you, if we decide that we're going to serve you, that we're going to love you with all of our hearts, that we're going to minister as your sons and daughters, we're going to be rejected as well. So, Father, teach us to not be surprised if we're rejected. If men don't speak well of us. If they throw us out of cities and out of countries because we're proclaiming the good news. May we count it as a blessing, knowing that they haven't rejected us, they've rejected you. And Judgment Day is coming. So thank you, Jesus, that you model for us, that you are who you said you are. And may we lean into that all the days of our life, and even into glory. In Jesus' name, amen.